Hi, friends. Pastor Terry here. We are Okotoks Alliance Church, and this is the 10-Minute Coach. I'm going back to Mark chapter 8 and the message that I preached Sunday, May 7. Jesus asks some questions. We've worked our way through the balance of chapter 8. Next week we'll go on into chapter 9, and as we've been discussing through this series, this is all connected. This is masterful storytelling on Mark's part, and often he's used sandwich techniques to kind of start with an idea, end with an idea, so that we see that the stuff in between is connected. There have been threads that have been tied through it. I've not used that language quite as often, but this week we see a thread that kind of is pulled from way back and is drawn forward. And when you kind of look at the whole, you're like, okay, there's more being said than just meets the eye. And that's what we're finding here in chapter 8 as well. And these questions, I've categorized them as rhetorical questions, as practical questions, and then the essential question, who do you say I am? Which we get to toward the end of the Gospel of Mark. Now, I say that, and not quite, because one of the things that we've been looking at is how the disciples sometimes get it and sometimes don't get it. More often they seem that they don't get it. And the people that were supposed to get it are the ones that were getting it. We've seen that over the past few weeks with the Gentile mom from Tyre, and the region of Tyre and Sidon. Wrong race, wrong religious background, and yet she came to Jesus on behalf of her demon-possessed daughter. The deaf man down in the Decapolis region, end of chapter 7. Comes to Jesus, and we've seen this before. We saw it with the demoniac, again from the Gentile region, who comes to Jesus for deliverance, and Jesus sent him back. And then this crowd of 4,000 shows up in beginning of chapter 8. The next time Jesus is in the Decapolis, the 10 towns region south of the Sea of Galilee. And so all of these parts and pieces are coming together, and there's this huge question that hangs over the whole thing, and that is, who is Jesus? And we can make an academic assessment of that, but Jesus is asking us to make a personal assessment, a personal commitment to that. Who do you say I am, and what will you do with that? And we read on, and I did not comment much, because we go on, and Jesus, in response to Peter's confession, says... that he says, you are the Messiah, and Jesus warned them not to tell anyone. If you compare that to the retelling of this event in Matthew, Luke, or I think John, either in John as well, the word is added that flesh and blood has not revealed this, but the Spirit of God has revealed this to you. Mark is not wanting to get sidetracked by some of those other theological ideas, because he immediately goes on then to retell how Jesus recounts that he's going to Jerusalem to die, and Peter's like, heck no, not on my watch, and that's where Jesus rebukes him, says, get behind me, Satan. So again, we see the disciples are having this 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Sometimes it's 1 step forward, 3 steps back in terms of their understanding. But we're gonna see how this actually ties on into chapter 9 next Sunday as we continue to press forward through this gospel. As you're reflecting on this with your family or in your private quiet time or in your life group, there are a lot of places that you can go in the questions on the back of the sermon notes that are attached to online. Go to resources, www.okalliance.ca, click on resources, and you'll find your way there to sermon notes. Download those, and on the back there's some questions designed to help you dig a little bit deeper into this. But for the most part, I've kind of stayed at the question level, because the question level is kind of this 30,000 foot level of how this the retelling of these events connects into the rest of the Gospel of Mark, and it gives us this bigger picture of what Mark is leading us toward, what Jesus has been leading us toward, the revelation that is there. But you could go into the details of any one of these events. As I said at the beginning of that message, there are at least 4, I think I said 4 sermons that could be preached out of this text. Maybe it's 5 sermons that could be preached out of this text. There's probably 1,000 sermons that could be preached out of this text. But there are some distinct segments that we could look at. We could look at the yeast of the Pharisees, or the leaven of the Pharisees, and what is that about, and what does it mean for lies to kind of infiltrate our lives and begin to affect the whole of our lives because we are believing something false. we could dig into the healing of the blind man and how it parallels the healing of the deaf man at the end of chapter 7. It's just Mark is giving us these indicators. This is a sandwiching kind of technique, but we've gone beyond that piece of bread in order to keep this bigger piece of the narrative flowing. What does it mean for Jesus to have healed in parts? I think there's it's encouraging to me that when I've had to pray for somebody's healing and I have to go back and back again, well, at least we have one or two instances where Jesus did the same, seemingly for his own purposes. In this case, we're seeing kind of an unlayering of understanding for the disciples. They are like the blind man, that they're seeing a little bit, kind of, sort of, but not really. And then you get to Peter's confession. It's like, oh, yay, he's got it. And then you get to his rebuke of Jesus, not on my watch, Lord. And Jesus has to rebuke him and say, get behind me, Satan. And we're like, okay, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But the blind man, they're seeing a little more. And the time is going to come when they will be completely able to see. And that won't be until after the resurrection of Jesus. Death, burial, resurrection. At that point, they begin to get it. Although even there, it takes them a bit of time. It's not until the ascension and then the Holy Spirit comes at Pentecost. We're going to celebrate Pentecost in just a couple of Sundays. The Holy Spirit came and indwelt them, and then they were given full revelation. In fact, Jesus had promised them back in the Gospel of John. He says, I will leave, and it's for your benefit that I leave, because if I leave, then the Holy Spirit will come, another comforter who's like myself, the Paraclete, and then he will lead you into all understanding. He will teach you. Well, hasn't Jesus been doing that? Yes, but now we have this benefit of the Holy Spirit indwelling us, teaching us, leading us, and that's going to be necessary for them to really fully get it. I made a little bit of a cryptic statement at toward the close of the message, that the Pharisees have been these foils in the account. They're these guys that just never get it. In fact, they're so hard-hearted they're going in the wrong direction. However, that will change. Some of them will get it. And we'll see evidence of that with Joseph of Arimathea, who takes the body of Jesus to bury it. There are some who are believing. We'll see it in the book of Acts, where it tells us that there were Pharisees, those of the tribe of the Pharisees, or the sect of the Pharisees, who began following Jesus, and they became part of the church. The resurrection made a huge difference in their ability to see. So we got to be easy on them, because you and I continue with this 1 step forward, 2 step back kind of reality, right? And given that, we have to give a lot of grace to the disciples, because we now have the benefit of, yes, the resurrection, the benefit of, yes, the filling of the Holy Spirit, and yet we still struggle. We've crossed a major fault line, if you will. What's the right term? The Great Divide in BC marks where the watershed goes a different direction. We've crossed the Great Divide, and the watershed now in the Gospel of Mark is moving all toward Jerusalem and all toward the crucifixion and then the resurrection of Jesus. And this last third or so of the gospel is going to take us in that direction. Jesus has made this declaration. Peter said, hey, not on my watch. Jesus said, get behind me, Satan. This is God's purpose, which helps explain. I was really thrilled to have one of our teenagers approach me last Sunday and say, I don't understand why sometimes Jesus says, don't tell anyone. And then other times, like with the demoniac, he says, go tell everyone. The best answer that we have to that is that he is managing expectations. I was doing pre-marriage with a couple yesterday, helping them get ready for their wedding. And managing expectations in our relationships is enormous, right? If somebody says, hey, you didn't do this, and they're like, I didn't know I was supposed to do that, and we get this conflict that begins. The Jewish people in particular were looking for a Messiah who would come as a military rescuer, and Jesus is having to manage these expectations. And so, depending on the crowd, with the demoniac, go tell everyone, they weren't looking for a Jewish Messiah in the Gentile world, but in the Jewish world, they were. And so I think the other thing that Jesus is needing to do is he's needing to safeguard some time with his disciples. He needed to take them up to Tyre and Sidon and have some teaching time with them. Doesn't tell us a lot about that, but you got to imagine that there's a lot of teaching that would take place along the road as the rabbi would walk with his disciples on these major road trips by foot. So my point was that there's lots that you can dig into here, and you could talk about this revelation that takes place at Caesarea Philippi, one of the headwaters of the Jordan River. You could talk about Jesus' prediction of his death and Peter's denial and what's going on there. There's so much here for us. You'll have a great time if you're in your life group or with your family, or if you're just in your quiet time kind of reading through and reflecting on what's going on in these biblical texts. And invite the Holy Spirit to speak to you. Invite him to point out to you. And if you have yet to make a declaration of who Jesus is, would you genuinely consider that he is who the scriptures say he is? He is the Messiah, the anointed one, the promised one from God. He does only things God can do because he is God among us, God incarnate. And I've offered a prayer at the end of that sermon. You could go back and review that if you've never prayed a prayer like that before. I pray that Jesus meets you profoundly in this reflection, and that through the course of these coming days and weeks, he would continue to reveal himself to you, and you would continue to grow in your confidence in him. We'll be back next week with 10-Minute Coach, with Sunday Message. This is now the 11-minute and 21-second Coach. I'm Pastor Terry Lee. We are Okotoks Alliance Church. Bless you, and bye for now.